This session will focus on alternative avenues available to architecture graduates. If you are not sure whether practicing as an architect is a career path for you, join us to hear from professionals who have changed their career direction while utilizing their skills learned throughout their studies. We will have 3 speakers this evening: Ellie Sampson, Tina Law, and Joe Ashbridge. Our first speaker is Ellie Sampson. Is an architecture graduate and model maker. She studied at the Bartlett. Her work has been displayed at the RIA Summer Show and as part of the V&A. Ellie worked in Howard Tompkins Architects as an architectural assistant and as the practice's full-time model maker and workshop manager. Nominated at the AJ's New Talent list, as well as pursuing freelance model making projects, Ellie is currently a tutor for the Bartlett's Masters in Architecture course and has run model making workshops at institutions including the Wallet Collection, the RIBA, and the Institute of Making, and numerous universities around the UK. On to you, Ellie.
Hey, yes, hi, thanks for the introduction. My name is Ellie Sampson. I'm currently mainly working as a full-time model maker. I work freelance currently, and I also tutor on the MSI course at the Bartlett. Just a bit about why I got into architectural design in general. My parents my mum is an architectural designer, my dad is an architect, and this actually influenced me more than the obvious, I guess. Seeing my parents work and having creativity and expressing yourself creatively with drawings and making was often a big part of my childhood.
Other than the obvious of seeing my parents be creative, my mum actually, this is a picture I really love of her working our kitchen table. So I really did kind of, from a young age, see everything that she was doing in particular. And I think that actually, although obviously my dad being an architect was really pivotal, seeing what my mum did in the process of making from a young age was very influential. The idea of texture, layering surfaces together, collage, and that tactility of design was always at the fore for me because of that, because it was just right there in front of me. These are one of them being a very early model. I think I was like 3 or 4, made this model of John Lennon, which I think is still my mum's favourite model of mine. She has it beside her desk where she works now, made of straws, toilet roll, masking tape, and cotton wool from my memory. But I think that idea of wanting to bring things, the physical things into the world and make them myself was really important. And it manifested itself by that very intense image of me staring at a scrap model I was making. But even in art and design, I wished I could paint better, and I saw people doing oil paints, etc., and felt very jealous. But then I just realized to go with it, to run with it, and I was clearly, sorry, I'm just clearly inclined to do things through installation, through sculpture, and through getting my hands dirty, as it were. So I decided just to embrace that part of my process. Now that brought me kind of at the end of A levels. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I just had no idea what really. And I think going to Art Foundation at the time, it was free to go if you were 19, and that was just so amazing to me, because it was this year I could just have fun, really embrace all types of creativity. I've got images there of graphic design. We were part of our rotations, as they were called, set design and theatre design, furniture design, fashion, textiles, and really just getting to dip into all of these areas and decide what was best for me. And from there, I realized 3D and spatial was very much right. My end project really brought a few things together for me. It really kind of clarified a few thoughts about my making process and therefore what I wanted to do for university. I did this interactive pop-up installation piece in the middle of the area I grew up and lived at the time, Crouch End in North London. I built a large 3D map of the area and made little kits of drawing materials and maps and disposable cameras and asked members of the public to take these kits with them throughout their day, and just see what they observed, and collect things from around them, draw things, and then bring them back to me so I could pin them on this like large interactive map. And it was such an insight for me as to the idea of art and design interacting with the public. And I think that's something that I've really embraced throughout model making as well, because when I went to university, I really enjoyed architecture, but I did feel like it was quite, at the time, it felt quite, even though it's something that everybody experiences, the process of it felt quite insular at the time. And I really love with models, it feels a kind of everybody understands a model. And I think that's something that's really driven me forward with my work as well, like making things for public display or making things for public interaction. I've really enjoyed that aspect. I also think between my foundation and starting at university, I travelled in the US for a few months. And this, the scale of the cities I visited there, and just the multifaceted nature of them, I found very overwhelming, but really impactful. Seeing, dragging my poor friend who wasn't into architecture to places like Falling Water, and areas around Chicago, that I just felt really kind of the things that I had never seen before, just the scale of the buildings. So that was very important for me. For my undergraduate degree, I went to the Bartlett School of Architecture. This is a picture of us setting up an installation project in Soane's Pittshanger Manor in Ealing. And it just solidified for me that choice was correct, of going for something like architecture, which I really wasn't actually that sure of at first. I think I mainly gravitated towards something like set design because I felt there was quite a clear narrative, and combined quite a lot of my interests in the sense of making things perhaps more quickly. The idea of architecture that I could never get my head around, and actually what led me to choose model making full time, was that the time frames of the projects I just couldn't get my head around. As a part one, say, sitting in a meeting and hearing something would be built in 5 years' time, I liked the immediacy of these installation style projects and model making quickly. But that method of making really kind of built in my undergraduate year, always being hands-on with things and developing a style that suit both that kind of analog making and digital processes. I took 2 years out in between part one and part two, and when I went to House Tompkins, I really felt that they too understood that feeling of getting things, both doing things that made sense in the computer, doing things in CAD that made that were quicker and allowed you to do things. But I really felt that they understood that feeling of needing to take things out of the computer occasionally, as it were. So models were a big part of my my work at House Tompkins. So by the time I reached master's level back at the Bartlett, I knew I wanted to do something in architecture, but as I say, I just didn't know exactly what yet. I was kind of back in that position I felt I was in Chelsea College of Art and Design, where I had narrowed things down as much as I could at that point, and I just needed help narrowing them down further. And model making just became the clear front runner for me of what I wanted to do. It seemed to combine all of my design impulses and instincts, and also every time I was making something, I felt I could understand things spatially, more so than I could in any other format. And again, developing that idea I mentioned before of creating things digitally and then going back and pulling them kind of out of the computer again and making them by hand, and doing this over and over again became a really important part for me, for my design. Overall, by the time I reached the end of university, I had a lot of people saying to me, "We've done all this now, you must want to be an architect, like, why waste?" waste your years of study, basically. But I never saw them as years wasted. I always felt like I was kind of adding something more to my pot, as it were. And particularly model making, just kind of, I actually didn't know I wanted to be a model maker at that time. I didn't know if I thought that, you know, model making itself is something people study, and sometimes I was a bit concerned about, you know, the adapting things to different scales quickly, efficiently, always hitting a time frame really kind of was something I felt quite overwhelmed by, but I kind of delighted in the challenge of it. So when I went back to practice, back to Howth Tompkins, I chose because I just loved my part one experience there. I worked there for a year as a part two, and then I kind of summoned the courage to ask my directors to be the full-time model maker for Howth Tompkins. I I basically created like a nerdy PowerPoint presentation to show them. But basically, as I worked, I realized I was in the unique position at that time because there was no other model makers. Everyone sort of piled in to make different models as and when they were needed. I was in the unique position of kind of developing a style of how we move between scales. I bought paper cutting experience that I had developed at university and been developing in my own free time. I then also kind of absorbed the idea that had been developed at the practice for a while of making things at larger scales. 1:25 in particular, as this is quite a key scale for set designers and prop makers in the theatre world, and lots of theatres are made by Howth Tompkins. So that idea of immersing yourself in a model seemed really key, and making things at large scale that could be tested on site also became a really key part of my day-to-day work. So the variety of projects I loved, and as I say, the kind of immediacy and the quite tightness of the time frame always felt like a challenge. But being able to turn over a project in, you know, a few weeks or a month if it's a presentational model really kind of fit with my my enjoyment of art and design and bringing things into being as quickly as I could. This is just some more of those kind of larger scale immersive models, and developing that style of using a lot of different mediums, using fabrics, using MDF and timber, and then using paper, all in one model to kind of make things that worked best in that format. I realized when I put this photo up, the idea of the models that the public can interact with, everyone's turned away from the model in the bottom. But basically that idea that I thought about before of model making feeling like a very immersive and kind of equalizing medium, because I feel like everyone could understand it. Architecture and design, obviously there's so many elements of public interaction with them in that we see and experience buildings every day, but the design process did feel quite closed. Like not everyone has the training to read plans and sections in a certain way, for instance. Whereas if, say, at public consultations, we brought out a model, there was an instant kind of connection for people of like, you know, I live there and that's where I, you know, go for a walk, and all these things kind of clicked into place. So I just loved that idea of building things that people could handle or immerse themselves in. Alongside working in Howth Tompkins, I was trying to develop my own paper cutting style outside of work hours, setting myself little challenges at first of, can I recreate views? This was my view actually from my desk at the time where I was living. And trying to push the paper cutting medium maybe to be, and combining it with my architectural training, basically, and my architectural understanding of buildings. But I really loved the idea of building certain models, maybe even like theatre sets or film sets. So trying to combine all those things that I'd learned up till that point. So now this is the kind of work I do, I guess. This is some images of recent projects. And And each model I do try and introduce something I haven't done before, whether it be lighting in a certain way, photography, model photography, and photographing things in a certain way. Some of these photos are actually done by a good friend who is an architect and a photographer. And then I also alongside this, during the pandemic, I tried to push myself with the turnover of models I did, making things in miniature of people's houses and trying to get them made and sent off, and that kind of process of immediacy I mentioned before, it's kind of really pushed me to resolve things quite quickly. I'll just go through these now. I do think it's important for me to touch on my social media presence, I guess, became really important to myself as a I don't want to say as a business, but obviously I have to kind of move through things as a business and sell and have commissions and sell models online. And I found that so I felt quite self-conscious at first about showing my work on social media. But then I kind of quickly realized it's bringing in that same tactility again, that for people to understand a medium of work and the interaction with models. Some of my teaching, whether it be in a kind of lecture format or workshop format, I've really enjoyed both working with architecture students and then also people that they don't practice in art and design. I actually think when I have workshops, this is say in the top corner at the Institute of Making, people that aren't trained in art and design, just they kind of much more kind of, they seem to be quite free with their model making in a way that I almost try and bring that back into when I'm tutoring or teaching architecture students, because I think there's a sense of, if something doesn't look like a presentational model, I feel quite self-conscious about it. And I just really think of that idea of sketch modeling and modeling things quickly, and being quite kind of free about what something might look like is something I'm trying to kind of imbue my teaching style with. Before I mentioned a friend who's a photographer who helps me when I'm taking photos of models. And I think, well, by talking about all of my work and what I do, I really realized that it seems silly not to mention all of the kind of amazing people that surround any creative person to help them with their practice, whether it be photographing work or opportunities for workshops, or commissions for certain models that push forward your own design and your own kind of portfolio. If there's one bit of advice I'd give to anyone considering something in the creative field, whether it be, architecture itself or something surrounding architecture, I would say that idea of identifying kind of people that have similar interests as you and your creative view, and really working with them and trying to understand kind of your creative community as a whole has really helped me. So these are just some people I think that and here too that have either helped push my work forward, or I'm kind of also doing work for them, or or they're helping promote my own work, and vice versa, I'm promoting theirs. That's something that I felt has really made me feel kind of supported in this kind of new venture for me of my career. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was very informative. Your model making work certainly has developed from university onto practice, onto lovely collections. And now to our second speaker. Tina Law is an origami and paper artist based in London. She studied at the Mackintosh School of Architecture, designed and produced artwork for leading brands such as Google, Sense UK, Mazda, and Estee Lauder. She has placed her origami centerpiece displays in front of hundreds at highly publicized events, most recently the Rings of Power premiere at the British Museum. Alongside this, she also manages her own bespoke origami jewelry collection, Storigami, which was featured at L'Oreal's HQ Christmas table as part of an initiative to celebrate and raise awareness of sustainable and eco-friendly brands. On to you, Tina.
Thank you so much for introducing. Yeah, I'm Tina and I'm an origami and paper artist. I'm just going to have this slideshow kind of go in the background as I speak. just to talk about. I just find it really a lot easier to talk about my work by just showing the things that I've been involved with. So I, like what was introduced, I studied at Mackintosh School of Architecture at Glasgow School of Art, and I finished my 3 years of study with a Bachelor of Architecture degree. So I decided to study this course as I had a very deep interest in space and form, and as a part of specifically the art school, it had integrated modules where we were able to collaborate with in and across disciplines, and we were greatly influenced by artistry from other departments such as textiles, sculpture, fine arts. And so as a creative, I feel very strongly about how architecture impacts us physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and most importantly, creatively. So coming out of secondary school, I studied in London. I felt like it was almost important to choose something and learn about something that I had a personal connection to. I had very little knowledge about architecture. I just knew it just made me feel a certain way. I just had a very personal connection with architecture, and I had very little understanding of it. So I thought it would be, I guess, a good idea to choose architecture as a continuation of my artistic endeavors. It was kind of like a career that I knew would, like my parents would be like backing me up for. So I think I just kind of pushed my artistic side and creative side in the back burner and decided to just pursue this career out of just, I guess, their approval of like a career that they wanted me to do. So I remember at my interview actually at the Glasgow School of Art, that they asked me why I actually studied the course, and even though my portfolio was so heavily geared towards fine arts, I'm glad they were convinced to allow me to actually study there. So my educational experience was very heavily drawn towards generating and using conceptual ideas to grow my artistic and critical thinking. We did a lot of hand drawings, we did a lot of just visuals and creating just like these hero images to really bring our imagination to life. Our studios were open and each year had their own little designated space, and where we all had our own desks, which were really handy. I remember going over to my friends' desks and asking them for peer-to-peer reviews, as well as just having them as comrades, working through late nights before the studio closed at 11 p.m. So the studio culture for me was definitely a very important part to play with how I adored the course itself. So looking back, I think the most enjoyable part of the course itself was actually the whole drawing up these big drops and speaking about my work, kind of like how I'm talking today and presenting my work. Even though those times, like preparing the drops, having everything prepared and getting all of that done and having the tight deadlines, that was such a stressful time. It probably helped to really like give me the sort of critical way of seeing my work, where I didn't have to where I had to justify everything. I didn't only just talk about my work as, oh, I liked it or didn't like it. And I think I enjoyed the fact that I could do that. And then so the course itself, it enabled me to have the beginnings of how I can think now as an artist, as I made a lot of models and worked with different mediums, and it was a place where it taught me how to use a scalpel and that is the main tool that I use now for my career. And I learned how to use Illustrator. I learned how to use a different 3D rendering programs, which has definitely helped me in what I do now. So I work in both 2D and 3D spaces, and I believe I've honed into the skill of working in both dimensions due to my exposure to it through studying architecture. And it's something I definitely won't regret. And it's part of just how I am as a person. And I am still able to really enjoy what architecture can do and make me feel. As for my career path, it feels like something I've curated very gradually, and it's been very makeshift. It wasn't very clear cut, kind of like where architecture, you've got those kind of like little milestones to go off. Whereas for myself, I guess I grew up loving origami. I grew up loving paper, and I often used origami actually as conceptual models during my course. And I actually was made aware of not actually wanting to do architecture in the middle of my third year. So yeah, I was just starting to go, like, I was starting to open up my mind to other industries, other pathways. And I kind of came back to my first love for paper. So at the end of the year, I applied for internships and assistant work for paper art, as well as giving architecture placements a go again, where I just basically prepared multiple portfolios catered for each role. I heard back from all of the paper art roles, and having architecture as a background benefited in my creative thinking more than I actually anticipated. The reason why I go back to paper, I guess it's something, I don't know what it is. It's just a really tangible material that we see in our day-to-day lives, and it's just we use it in a way where it's so accessible, and it allows people from all ages to address it with such an open mind, starting from a single fold into the material, and art can be just become an approachable, and it's just such a beautiful art where you can express an outlet for anyone of any age. As I'm actually talking, I have origami on the side as like a just for my hands to move. I think it's also like such a it's my own sort of therapy. Like I don't really know how it's just impacted me in a way where it feels like it's an extension of myself. And I like specifically create a lot of these sort of 3D origami pieces that you're seeing in the screen right now. And these folded units come together to create the final sculpture, and the relationship between like the bigger picture and the small details always allow the viewer to see the structural integrity of such a simple material, which I love, and it's just filled with endless amounts of creative freedom. So yeah, since graduating from uni, I have been freelancing. So I just jumped the gun. I went from being a student to being a freelance, and yeah, started building my personal branding as an origami and paper art artist. So if I had to summarize what I am doing now, I would say I fold and cut paper a lot. So yeah, this presentation in itself kind of explains the array of work that I do. Sometimes I find it really hard to explain it, even to people in creative industries, because it's such a niche industry in itself. But yeah, I am, as a maker, I work mainly with paper, and I make bespoke pieces of art for commissions, branding, film sets, visual merchandising, and many, many more. I basically do a bit of everything in between. So my artwork kind of spans from paper engineering to origami, and I conceptualize and design and produce artwork for clientele work. But I see the greatest joy in the production side, just working with my hands. And I've had the privilege of using my origami skills to help individuals use their hands to also bring to the forefront of the importance of mindfulness and well-being as well. I'm going to find the screen, the shot specifically of which workshop I want to talk about actually. So in this workshop, I'm going to go into full screen. It's one of the most impactful workshops that I had the chance to lead. It was with a group of hospitalized children that suffered from eating disorders. And Origami was basically a neutral ground for them to not be triggered about the idea of food or anything about their condition. So they were able to just make something, and that in itself, like just helping them to like use their hands and just like distract themselves for a while of what they were going through was just really beautiful for me to see. And they were able to keep it as well. Like it's not these earrings they made from their own hands, and they were able to customize it, put heart into it, and it was like what I said before. It was just really beautiful to see how much this skill in itself was able to bless these children. One of my favorite paper art pieces I've created, I'm going to try and find it in here, is this one. This is a Osaka castle in Japan that I built in 6 days, and it stands around 45 centimeters tall for Google Cloud's campaign that showcased landmarks and attractions from different cities. We made a scene for basically each city, and it was just such a privilege to especially make one for Hong Kong as well, which is a city that I hold fondly as part of my upbringing. To round things up, I really want to encourage the matter of being intentional with what it is we all want to put out there with our creative expertise. For those who need a little push to go outside of their comfort zones, like even though you may have studied architecture for X amount of years, no matter, may it be just your BA or at the end, I want to encourage them to just not be afraid with the outcome, and to just send emails out to places or message people or business, an artist, a cause you have that you've always been intrigued about. Just start connecting. And I really liked how Ellie was mentioning before in her presentation about like the people, the networking that really bring her together to make her work come to life. Like that has also happened for me. I needed that networking to get connections into doing the projects that I've been able to be a part of, and just value the people that really believe in your skill sets and what you can give. Also value your creativity deeply, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tina. That was both inspiring and quite amazing to see all your work. Creativity really is quite inspiring. I hope the students find it helpful to see that not necessarily architecture is the final output. And now to our last speaker, Jo Ashbridge. So founder and CEO of architecture charity AzuKo. Jo is passionate about humanitarian architecture. She's worked in international development for 15 years, including constructing one-room shelters in Vietnam, authoring guidelines for disaster relief shelters, evaluating community-led design in China, and improving house construction with low-income communities across Bangladesh. In 2014, Jo set up a charity called AzuKo to build a fairer world. Jo regularly speaks on architecture and design for international development. So on to you, Jo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak tonight. You'll hear from my voice that I've caught a bit of a cold. So please forgive me. I hope my voice holds out for the next 10 or so minutes. I also have a dog. I'm dog sitting tonight. So please forgive her if the postman calls and she starts barking. I mean, it was so lovely to hear those presentations just now, and to see the diversity of what people can do after an architecture degree. It really opens up a whole host of opportunities. But I remember when I was at architecture school, we didn't have these types of discussions. It was very much taught as a linear track. You know, you did your undergrad in general architectural studies. You got your part 1, you started to specialize in your part 2, you went into practice, you learned what it was to build a building, you push on to part 3, and you potentially open up your own studio. And that's wonderful. That really is a wonderful career. But it's not your only option. An architecture degree and everything it entails, the skills you learn from presenting to problem solving, the creativity that's balanced with sort of building physics. All these skills are highly sought after in different sectors. So it's not the only thing open to you, and hopefully tonight you'll see that for sure. When I finished school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do at university. I didn't have any architects in the family, but I knew I loved building, loved making. I used to create model ships with my dad. And I went to an architectural open day at the University of Bath. And we were set a hypothetical brief, and we spent the day as a group working through that, and we had to build a model using a single small piece of foam board, and I was hooked. I thought, well, what kind of degree is this? This just seemed like the perfect thing for me. And that's where I studied my undergrad, my part 1 at the University of Bath. It was brilliant. It was brutal, but brilliant. Many all-nighters, many difficult crits, friends made for life. But I think even then I didn't feel like I quite fit in with the type of architecture that I was being asked to design, and particularly for the type of clients that I was designing for, hypothetically. I went on then to do an Erasmus exchange, and I'm not quite sure if Erasmus still exists, but hopefully something similar does. And I really, recommend, if you do have an opportunity like this, to take it with both hands. I spent a year in Stockholm in Sweden, studying alongside people from all over the world, a different type of architectural teaching, new perspectives. This was my route to studio and back to my residence every day. It was just glorious. And that Christmas I came home and I was building a model for my final crit, and I couldn't quite work out how to make the roof work. And my dad came over, and I remember him, helping me out. He's a welder and a woodworker as well, incredible maker. And it was really simple for him, but difficult for me. And it became very clear that I could draw a mean section. I could knock up a pretty cool perspective, but I had no idea what it was to build a building. I had no idea the sort of craftsmanship in construction. And so he suggested that I do a stint in construction to understand better, and that it would make me a better designer. So that's what I did. That summer, I moved to Vietnam. I volunteered on a project down the Mekong. We were building very simple, modest houses for families whose houses were at risk from monsoon rains, flash floods. I was very much unskilled labour. I was moving raw materials from one end of the community to the other by wheelbarrow, because the alleyways were so small. The roads were sort of dirt tracks. No vehicles could get down them. This is my team I was working with. I learned to lay brick. I learned to lay plaster, and ultimately I learned that construction is an art, and the level of craftsmanship it takes to build even very small buildings. I think it really changed my approach to how I design. And it was my first sort of step into international development, although I didn't know it then. I moved into, I'll just skip back there a bit. I moved back home after that trip, and I still had itchy feet. But I like Ellie and Tina were saying just there, you're very much taught, you have to move on to your part 2, and after that you'll have to move on to your part 3. But I wasn't quite ready yet. So I took a year out between those degrees, and I did everything I could to learn from people in international development. Now, I had no network at that point in international development. It's not something that's taught at university. So I had to work pretty hard. A lot of it was sort of packing your backpack, getting on a train, getting on a plane, turning up. I think it might have been easier back then. And I worked with various nonprofits in various places, mainly in East Africa, supporting community projects. When I came home, I very much ran out of money at that point. I decided, okay, I do need to do my part 2, but let's see if I can specialise in the type of architecture that I'm interested in. I undertook my master's, my part 2, at the University of Cambridge. It focused on environmental design, and it allowed me to tailor my thesis to a project that I was already supporting in Uganda. So it worked out brilliantly for me. And on my final crit, and I don't recommend going at this tight, I presented, and an hour later I was on a flight to Geneva. I had an internship at a shelter organisation there. And Geneva in Switzerland is very much the European hub for international development. And I needed to understand the sector a bit more. So I was working for a very small nonprofit in policy. We were mainly drafting guidelines for transitional shelters. These are housing solutions, or a housing solution that may be appropriate for communities whose houses and communities have been razed to the ground, for example, in a cyclone. It gives a very basic housing unit to get people in shelter, ASAP, but it allows for over time for them to transition or transform into a more permanent housing solution. And we were writing the sort of international guidelines for those. And through this work in Geneva, and through being surrounded by the UN, International Organization for Migration, all the big non-profits, non-governmental organizations, I really sort of learnt about the system and tried to understand where I could fit, and it was brilliant. I love the policy side of things, but for me, I was really interested in field work and working directly with communities, and the rest is history, really. I spent a lot of years living out of a backpack, working as an architectural consultant for various non-profits in various countries. I started to focus on working with earth and sustainable natural materials like bamboo. And in 2013, started having conversations about setting up something myself based on some of the principles that I'd learned, but also that I strongly believed in, and very much rooted in co-design, sort of supporting communities to lead their own design and development. And AzuKo is an architecture charity. We're pushing on 10 years now. Next year we'll celebrate our 10th birthday, a decade of impact. I don't know where the time has gone. AzuKo means all of humanity, and we're working. Our mission is to end housing poverty. We work both in Bangladesh and in the UK, and we aim to do that in 3 ways: through co-designing housing and infrastructure. We work with communities, not for them. We do not drop architecture in from overseas. It's very much, supporting communities to create their own vision. We deliver construction training, and the majority of this, around 92% of it, we work with women directly, particularly because in rural Bangladesh, where much of our training exists, women are the individuals who manage and maintain their homestead, where many of their husbands work away. So it's so important that they understand, the design and construction principles and how to improve and make their housing more secure. And finally, we support communities to understand their housing rights. If you do not understand what rights you should be afforded, you can't fight for them. So we often work with communities that don't have secure tenure. And ultimately, we're contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The goals were created in 2015 by UN member states, 17 goals to work towards to create a more prosperous planet for everyone. And we're particularly focused on SDG 11, making cities and human settlements more inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. So we're part of a broad group of organisations working towards that. And here I was going to show a timeline of sort of, you know, going all the way back to my school days and where I am today, and, you know, some of the countries I've worked in and some of the highlights. But it just felt too simple, as in sort of a blueprint for how you might do it, when actually this represents how it's felt. An absolute roller coaster, some, you know, very tough times, equally some incredible highs, and no doubt the next 15 years will be very much like this as well. Just to talk on some of the challenges, I've often been working in quite remote, rural, insecure areas, sometimes conflict zones. And as a single female, there are some issues around that. I've often worked where there has been limited to no Wi-Fi, so being cut off from family and friends, you know, from global news for many, many months. Places where there's limited electricity. You know, you can't turn on that much needed fan when there's 92% humidity and you feel like you're not going to make it through the night. Financial worries. You know, I moved from sort of one project or one piece of research, one consultancy to the next, and you know, that's not always a smooth transition. I maxed out my overdraft a couple of times. It was quite I was walking a tightrope in those early days. But the highlights have absolutely outweighed some of those challenges, and that's why I'm committed to the sector. And I feel incredibly privileged to work in a job that I adore, to work with communities who have such strength in the face of incredible adversity. We prioritise at AzuKo working with extreme poor communities that are facing acute housing poverty. And when I talk about things like that, I'm talking about access to no toilet, no access to clean water, limited to no electricity, housing that is not comfortable, not safe, not secure. It is a real privilege to work with them to realise a better, safer, healthier future. And the last thing I'd just like to leave with is it was quite difficult to open the door sort of 16, 17 years ago into international development for myself. Back then, they were only looking for sort of engineers, logisticians. They didn't really want architects, or they thought they didn't want designers. But things are changing, mindsets are changing, and I think that they are seeing the value in what design thinking can bring to the table. We're not just creating shelters, but we're creating homes and communities, and a design mind can really add such weight to that conversation. So I don't think it's going to be an easy thing, but I do think the sector, the international development sector and the architecture sector do need to talk to each other, and the international development sector would really welcome more architects to join them. So it would be lovely for me to see more people considering this as an option. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dor. That was very inspiring. I mean, you're literally saving the world. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm very impressed, and I'm sure that's how everyone is seeing it as well. Now we're going to move on to questions. So Tina and Ellie, if you want to switch on your cameras as well and join us, I'm going to try and have a conversation. So our first question is from David. I guess this can be to everyone, really. So I guess, Joe, we might as well start with you. So this is to everyone. From a profitable business model point of view, could you please comment if all presented businesses are financially feasible without any other kind of source of income. So I think straight to the point, was it possible? Did you survive with these kind of alternative careers? So yeah, Joe, why don't you start?
Great question. Important question. Because you do need to create a sustainable situation for yourself and potentially for your family. In the early days, it was really tough for me, like I said, financially, but I managed to ride the wave. I managed to have some difficult conversation with the banks in the early days. We set up AzuKo as a registered charity. So we bring in money to deliver our projects, to pay our staff, ensure we pay all our staff living wage plus. We try to diversify our income so that we're not solely reliant on one stream. So we write grants, we look for corporate sponsorship, we hold events, individual giving campaigns. We also consult for housing associations, for councils, so we have contract work. So we have a mix of different streams coming in. We're still a tiny charity, but we're making it work.
Great. I mean, see, everyone, that's living proof you can do something else and it can even benefit others. So that's really interesting. I mean, Tina, what about you? Have you, I mean, seeing the big names that you've offered us, I mean, clearly, hopefully it has been working, being this kind of creative origami director.
So I think it depends on how much you're really putting yourself out there as someone who wants to create with a specific stylized way of work. A lot of my work come through networking as well as just connections and people that I've worked throughout the years, and I've just built bridges there so that whenever something of a kind comes up, like, oh, there's an origami piece that needs to be made, I would be someone that person comes to. Of course, there are ups and downs with my with my industry. There's a lot of peak season and off-peak seasons. So actually, you have to value yourself in a way where you think about those other times where you don't have work. So I had my peak season during Christmas, a lot of different like visual merchandising, branding work happened there, where I'd have 5 back-to-back projects happening all at once. So it's a matter of like, what are you valuing yourself at, and how much are you putting kind of a price to what you can give for your services? And really know, like, I've had to learn a lot about what that looks like in my own line of work, especially with craftsmanship, where it does take a lot of time, and finding clients to actually respect and honor the efforts you put into it. So yeah, a lot of it is just negotiating in the beginning and really trying to figure out the right budgets for it. And of course, it just depends on how much you want to value yourself in that space to really, I guess, figure out and really efficiently figure out this alternative career in itself.
Great answer, Tina. I mean, very inspiring. And last, Ellie, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Has it been a profitable business, you know, in your model making point of view?
I mean, yeah, I think I related so much to Joe's diagram there, or timeline, roller coaster of what you go through when you try and kind of set out on, not on your own. It sounds weird to say on your own, because as I say, like before, like you try and build up lots of support around you with what you do. But yeah, financial support that you have to provide yourself, you know, like when you're doing. So mine went from doing everything, working full time in an architecture practice, knowing that I liked architecture, but it wasn't what I wanted to do full time. And working completely like on my model making endeavors in the evenings. At first, you know, kind of, I remember doing some things and like posting photos of it online or something, and someone instantly was like, why are you doing this? What's it for? Are you selling this? Like, so many questions of like, when you put yourself out there, what does that mean, kind of thing, like you're branding yourself as doing something. And I had to reply like, it was for my boyfriend. It was not like, you know, it was like such a kind of, it was my own project. And they were like, oh, you know. So doing that, going from doing things just for yourself, to challenge yourself, to develop basically I always saw it as, and maybe that's from studying, you know, art and having to apply for different courses from the Art Foundation up to architecture school. I saw it as an ongoing portfolio of stuff, and how can I add a portfolio? So when I wanted to approach my directors at House Tompkins to be their model maker, I thought, okay, they've seen me make models as a part two, but how can I bring like my personal projects, anything I've tried to do outside of work, what have I tried to do in work, into a kind of portfolio to sort of prove myself or prove my ability to do this. So I kind of saw things like that. So I do think, and I went from being even then like their full-time model maker, and then I went to doing 4 days a week so I could fit in my own personal projects. So even only very, very recently, unlike Tina, as she said, I was, you know, I was amazed at the kind of going from uni to freelance, because that does feel, I think it's kind of, maybe that's the time to do it sometimes, because you have to, if you contemplate it too much, it feels kind of like, is this mad? Like, you know. So I've actually only done it for myself, gone freelance like a month and a half ago. But I still have teaching alongside it. So I guess it's whatever works for you. You have to really feel out what you think is feasible, what you think is possible. And I don't think never seeing the kind of props or the thing you have as your, you know, people say like quitting my day job or whatever, but I never saw my day job as something unenjoyable and something I wanted to completely get rid of. I saw it as something as teaching me something else. So I would say that that kind of enjoy all of those things are supporting you financially while you try out your own thing, and then gradually maybe your own thing can start to dominate your career, you know, hopefully. So I think that's how I would imagine it. And that's the thing, it's like such a good question, but there isn't no simple answer, and everyone will have a different answer, I imagine, to this.
Thank you so much, Ali. I mean, that's something to consider, I guess. I mean, what's great about all three of you, you kind of found your calling at different periods in time, and I think that's very interesting. I guess I have a question. So what was kind of your own struggle or your own conversation going with yourself when you decided, you know, I want to do what I'm passionate about, something else, and not letting fear get in the way, I guess, you know, because, oh, here we go, society's, you know, I've committed myself to doing an architecture degree, but, you know, really, and that's not necessarily, you know, how you want to do it. I mean, there were so many, in the olden days, it was like you can have multiple hats at the same time. You know, I don't know how they did it, like Da Vinci and all these, like doctor, whatever, architect, artist. It's like insane. But nowadays, it's kind of like, oh, you pick this, you should go into it. But so I just want to say good on you for actually doing that. So what was that inner monologue like? I'm curious. You can start with Joe, I guess.
I think it's still an inner monologue. My family, who are incredibly supportive, you know, still struggle to understand why I've not done my part 3. I sometimes feel I have to defend the type of work I do as architecture. In international development, you sometimes get a little bit of trolling. The nature of our work is about delivering super low cost, replicable solutions to improve people's lives and livelihoods. So it's not architecture with a capital A. You won't see it on grand designs, but for me, it is the essence, the all-encompassing part of architecture, the power of architecture. So that I sometimes find difficult. On my good days, I can shake it off. On my less good days, it's sometimes difficult to take on board with all the other sort of ethical considerations I have to deal with on a daily basis. So it's a constant for me. But I think particularly in international development, possibly in traditional architecture sector, and I'm not so familiar with that now, people are quite self-critical. and it's part of that sort of creative process as well. It also makes us better at our jobs. So there are positives and negatives to that. But yeah, it's not something that I'm done with. I've solved. Yeah, it's a constant sort of conversation internally.
All right, that's very interesting. I mean, Joe, what would you have said to yourself? I mean, let's say, go back a few years and, would you have encouraged yourself to do that? Like, would you say, no, I mean, you're on the right track, keep on going? Is that?
Sorry, to me?
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I mean, I feel privileged every day to wake up and work on these types of projects, to contribute my skills to this type of work. So in hindsight, yes, I would have loved to have said to my younger self, it's going to be tough, but you've got to keep going. But I didn't really have many people in that network at the beginning. So what I said to myself in the early days was just say yes to everything. If an opportunity comes your way, it seems scary, say yes. And that sort of mindset took me to the next opportunity, the next piece of learning. I'd sit down with anyone for a cup of coffee to sort of listen to their story and learn from them. Now my challenge is saying no, because my plate is so full. But yeah, that was the approach I took in the early days.
That's really great to hear. I mean, see everyone, other students, I think, watching all would be really happy to hear these kind of stories. What about you, Tina? I mean, do you struggle now? Like, do you also feel like you have to kind of defend what you're doing? Or do you feel like you can identify yourself as like an artist, or do you want to call yourself creative director? I think CEO is the best name you can call yourself. What about you, Tina? What's kind of your inner monologue like?
Oh, that's thank you. I feel very flattered. I think the inner monologue is always imposter syndrome, where because I chose so early on in my straight out of university to be like, I don't want to do the traditional kind of route of what it looks like to be even go down a normal career 9-to-5 situation. I think the whole fighting for it and trying to prioritize what it looked like and making this a worthwhile and like good for my well-being as an individual, kind of an important thing. So like what I mentioned before whilst I was presenting, my parents were the main people that I was trying to please for this career, for architecture. So it was a lot my main process actually when I was coming out to being like, I want to be an artist, was they were my main hurdle. They were my main kind of they were the main people that I was fearful of their rejection, their just it got to a point where I thought I was going to get disowned by them because of how much I feared for what this career could look like. And because this career didn't have a clear-cut idea to it, even in their eyes or even in society's eyes, it was very hard to even persuade them to what this could look like. So it's been a very ongoing kind of process. I think in the last couple of years, that's when they've kind of really grasped what my work looks like. I show them pictures, and like that's in itself them giving me support, supporting me, and letting me do what I want to do, and finding this kind of honing it into my own craft as something they see as a part of my strength building. And I guess every single time I talk about my work, it always kind of brings me back to my first love of why I do it. So like even speaking like this, this is a little booster for me to remind myself of why I am still in this industry. I constantly question why I still do this. It is an ongoing process of like kind of going back to what it is that brought me there in the first place. So yeah, like what I was mentioning before, just that intention of it's not about who you're trying to please externally, but actually where do you where do you really find a sense of core wellness in yourself, as well as really bringing something that's worthwhile to others around you. So yeah, I think that's probably how I get my head around it.
That's so lovely, Tina. I mean, that makes, I think a lot of people can identify with that. You know, it's kind of like, you know, what are these external pressures? Why are you doing something? I just same kind of question, a follow-up of what kind of Joe was. I mean, what would you have said to your younger self, you know, before you started your journey? Like, would you have been like, you know what, don't be afraid of your parents, everything will be fine? And then it did, it kind of worked out. I mean, so is that what you would have said, or you would have been like, yeah.
I think I would have told myself just, yeah, the communication aspect for my parents. Like, it's relationship building. So reminding myself, yeah, it's trying to encourage myself to be like, it's fine. Don't let the assumptions of how you think they'll feel, I guess, affect my decisions at the end of the day. So I think that was my hurdle of just being like, okay, I had to actually come to them to have this conversation, to confront them and actually see their reactions and see how they saw me as an artist, to finally kind of be like, okay, this is working. They don't just love me for what my career looks like. They love me for who I am as a person and what brings me happiness in that way. So yeah, I think that's the same with any sort of external, I guess, pressures. Just coming clean and being like, this is just how it is, and finding the positive kind of support, and also taking the negative criticism as good learning curves as well to what you want to kind of become.
That's great advice, Tina. I think anyone can relate to that. And now, lastly, Ellie, I mean, how was your inner monologue, right? Like when you kind of first started your model making journey? I know you just recently kind of started this freelance opportunity, or do you feel like you ended up kind of where you first liked architecture? You know, it was almost like your calling just emerged out of what you were doing.
Yeah, I have to say I related so much to what Joe just said of Antina, like everybody will ask if you deviate from kind of architecture as a path. Lots of people I think will ask, like, when are you going to do your part 3 though? I even had someone in an event like this ask me, and I was like, oh. And I think never, and again, it's like that question of my inner monologue was, do what and it's a very privileged position to be in, I guess, of saying like, do what you enjoy and what you feel brings you a feeling of, as Tina was saying, of self-worth, or as Joe was saying, kind of something that you just feel you need to learn more about and to help people, or whatever you choose to do what that brings you that sense of satisfaction and gratification in your work for as long as possible was my goal. And that's why, and I guess when you said to going free, I've only just gone fully freelance, but I've been doing work outside of my 9-to-5 work for the last like 4 or 5 years. And I could tell I really liked it because I was doing it in my spare time. So I'd be up until, you know, I know it was like going back to architecture school, as everyone who studies architecture knows, it's a very all-consuming topic. Like, you're there, you know, your studio becomes your home, and pretty much, or your flat, or you eat there, you meet all your mates there, and it's very all-encompassing. And that was the same kind of feeling with my own work. I guess I'm lucky enough, like my partner is an illustrator and did the same kind of thing I did, I guess, and did it first, you know, went from university and did what Tina did and went straight into freelance work as freelance illustration and architectural illustration. So seeing him do it, or seeing somebody do it, and that's why I guess an event like this is really important, because seeing somebody do it and seeing that it is possible is the only thing that kind of keeps you thinking like, oh, maybe I could do it. Or like, why not, kind of thing. Because I remember seeing him kind of, and he'll kind of hate me saying this, because he often feels like he can't complain about his job, because he's genuinely got, like, he got his first job, or full full sense of his career was like his dream job. So he's like, I can't complain about it. And I saw him doing that and how much he was getting out of it, and how he was slowly, incrementally kind of progressing with it and meeting new people and making like kind of networks, and his projects were getting bigger and bigger. And I was working in part two and perfectly enjoying it, but definitely kind of looked over and thought like, oh, it's not like, it's like feeding his creative, for want of a better word, like spirit, I guess. And I wanted the same for myself. So that was my greedy inner monologue, I guess, of seeing somebody do that, and kind of pushing yourself to try and do that and forge your own kind of. And that's the thing of like finding, friends often ask me actually of like, oh, I'd kind of like to do like something outside of architecture. They love architecture, but they're not 100% sure what their kind of side thing will be. But everyone kind of, I think, comes to the realization of it. It's that one thing you could end a day of work at, and other than like seeing your mates and seeing your family or whatever, or going out, like that's the thing you don't mind doing. So I think that's what I kind of thought to myself, like, I just, as Tina said in her, I really related to what Tina said in her presentation, of that kind of feeling of like calm with working with paper. And I felt exactly the same thing. I felt this kind of like, someone once described it in this interview I did of mindful mindlessness. It's like you kind of stop thinking and you're kind of trying to problem solve and things, but it feels very instinctive. And I think that's what showed me is kind of a, maybe this is what I should be doing, I guess.
Sorry, I love what you said about mindful mindlessness. That sounded absolutely lovely. Oh, look, we've already gotten a thank you from Lila, who's said it was creative and insightful and motivating. Ellie, just last kind of follow-up. What would you have said to yourself, while studying architecture school? What would you have said before you went down this kind of road?
It's a good question. I'm not 100% sure what I would have said to myself, because I think I kind of mentioned before, when I went into art foundation, the reason I chose architecture, other than like, I saw what my dad was doing and I knew it was kind of, I actually held off asking him for ages because he's somebody that's so passionate about architecture. I thought, like, I don't know, like I felt I kind of hid it for a while. Because also I think maybe it's just me, but like, I didn't want to do it because it's something I was aware of. I wanted to test if it was actually what I wanted to do. But I've definitely felt like the reason I went into architecture is that every area of 3D and spatial design I went into, whether it be like textiles and fashion, or whether in my art foundation, or even in like film and graphics, people were like, oh, you're doing architecture, right? Like without me saying anything, even though it had been in the back of my head for a while. So I think it was that sense of, what I'd say would be, stick with your initial gut feeling of try and do something that doesn't feel, it's kind of cheesy to say, but like doesn't feel like work for as long as possible. But it is work, like you're working hard, you're really challenging yourself, but it doesn't feel like, if you put like an essay in front of me, or I did something I haven't done in a while, I'd feel like fear, but also that kind of, that helpful challenge or whatever. So I think that's what I'd say, like keep trying, keep taking on those kind of challenges. And there is an important thing to remind yourself of, like, you will have niggles of financial worry, which is perfectly understandable. I think everyone here will have said that's been like kind of sometimes, like even though I've been doing freelance for a while in pieces, fully going into it a couple of months ago, I was like, oh, but I think you just find a way of making it work, whether it be you have to reach out and do something kind of on the side, or you might do a project that doesn't feel you might have to make a few sacrifices with the type of project you're doing for a bit in order to do something that you feel much more creatively free at, and things like that. So it's that kind of thing of like, try and undertake everything that comes your way, really, I guess, would be my key advice, or what I'd say to myself, my younger self.
I mean, that was lovely. And everyone, thank you so much for such great answers, and certainly an amazing conversation. I've learned a lot, and I think it also makes you question, why you're doing things. So I just wanted to say, I think we're going to come and wrap up to our end of your session. So thank you everyone for listening. Have a lovely evening. Remember to check out the @RIBA Education on Instagram to hear more events, and architecture.com to become an RIBA student member. It's free, don't forget about that. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Good night and take care, and best of luck to everyone on their career journey. Goodbye.